Welcome, Shirley. Welcome indeed. We were just reflecting before we started how it's been over 10 years since we first were in contact with each other in the days before video conferencing and everything was done in real life. So it's an irony that we are here today across the pond from each other on video. Shirley, you've just about or have just published a book, but your journey has certainly taken you many, many places over your career. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you, and I love when things like this come back together from what seems like 50 or 60 years ago before COVID.
And it seems like almost a bad dream, COVID these days, but
Right. But it did make us highly proficient at this, right?
absolutely, absolutely. So,
Thanks for having me.
no, well, you're very welcome. Thank you. So Shirley, tell me where do you want to start? When you graduated, before graduation, where does your career journey start for you?
I think I'll go backwards a little bit, which is for the last 25 years, I've almost 25 years, I've been doing work in inclusion and diversity, which is now called DE&I. And I didn't have any background in that. I it chose me. And so if you look at, I never have been in HR. I'm not an HR professional. Before I started this work, I was in consumer products. It was during a day that consumer products said, hey, as long as you have a degree, we'll train you. Because no offense to consumer products, but it's consumer products, right?
Really?
And my degree was in music education. Now, that sounds like that means you're highly creative, but what it really means is that you're super analytical. You're breaking down how this happened and how that happened. And even when if you've ever studied an instrument, you have to go, oh, that part went really well, but this part I have to go back to and adjust and adapt. So somewhere that I would have starved staying in education. I was working in a Catholic school. I had been raised with a bunch of other white Catholic kids in uniforms. In grade school, we were all lower middle class, but except for like 3 kids, right? We didn't know it because we all wore these uniforms. And then in high school, realized there was some wealth disparity. The only person who was different than me by race or ethnicity was one girl in high school. So go figure how I went from that to this work. Something happened when I was recruited for Frito-Lay, to Frito-Lay. And that was so exciting for me. I go, oh my gosh, I'm in Fortune 50 company. Wow, that's so cool. In fact, I referred to this in a TEDx talk I did in 2017, and I'm all proud, and they found me. Our goals were not soul filling, right? They were how many chips did you sell compared to last year? And I led the Carolinas division, and I had the 6th best sales record out of 26. When it came time to collapse divisions, the guy who had the worst sales record, 26 out of 26, got the job, and I lost mine. And I just really reeled from that. And that was, what happened here? Well, I can look at it and say, sure, I'm the only woman.
Mhm.
I was told literally I didn't spend enough time at the water cooler. Many stories about you'd think it was in the dinosaur age. Oh, I never had a skirt work for me before. I'm not going to listen to nagging from you at work. I worked for the most senior VP as his group leader. And I feel like that work prepared me for what I was doing, even though I didn't know it. So with that, we'll go wherever you want to go here, Guy.
So, yeah, it's. Would you consider it sounds like that's a pivotal moment in your life, let alone career?
The Frito-Lay moment.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. At the time, it just was horrific. It was, wait a second. I did everything I was to do. I met all of my goals. I exceeded my goals. So it was a time of, I think, pretty deep depression and forget the emotional part. How does that happen? So it really caused me to reflect a lot about that. I went to work for a local food broker after that, took a huge pay cut, but I thought I'm not going back in the corporate America thing, right? Just for a little bit. And then I saw it on a local level. Like, okay, you're here. Tell me what you're going to do for me. I just got hired because I have the skill set, so it was a pivot in retrospect. I was not that highly evolved to say, oh, excellent. I just got fired from my job. I lost my income. I'll see what I'll do here.
So you moved to a local food co.
It was like a food broker where they don't have sales forces, and it was very short-lived.
Right.
Yeah, you had a child in there and all sorts of life events that made me just stop working and spend time using my talents helping the church in a rebuild.
Oh, okay. And so how did you make that transition then to, what you are today, which is,
So I was,
advocate
okay,
for.
so I'm looking for a job. I'm a single mom. I have a 2-year-old.
Mhm.
I'd have money I had in savings that I'm living off of. Looking for jobs, looking for jobs. And this one thing kept calling my name. It was a company that was selling what was then just communication, stand-up communication. Now, being in HR, nobody spent 8 hours on communication anymore, but that was the day they were doing that. And I kept getting like the word, meaning the nudges, the inklings. And I tend to fight with messages from the universe and say, excuse me, I'm a single mom. Don't you know I need an income? And I went to work there the first year, nearly starved. The second year, I kind of, again, crafted my own thing because stand-up communication, nobody wanted 8 hours anymore. I don't care what your historical thing was, but stepped into Denny's had a consent decree from the Department of Justice. And it said you're discriminating against people, Black and brown people at the store level. So what I had from consumer products was, and even back from the music education degree, a highly analytical background. So I could say, hey, what are you trying to accomplish, Guy? Let me see how we can get there. And we pulled a team together, and that was the largest payout from a company for that kind of thing in the country. And so we worked simultaneously with Denny's executives and the Department of Justice. I would say underneath this hair coloring, I have a lot of gray hair from that experience because the Department of Justice was saying they're all evil racists. And Denny's is saying we had a leveraged buyout and we gutted our infrastructure training. And what was cool about that was even though You've heard about, we all think we're frauds. Somebody's going to find out. We don't know what we're doing, right? But I realized that the analysis that I could do is something as simple as sometimes people think about inclusion, diversity, or equity as some really fluffy thing. There were some really practical things that caused them to get sued. Hey, who's next? Did you get on the list yet? It's midnight. A bunch of people who are drunk come in at the same time. You have to put some order. Wait a minute, who's next? Do I think racists work there? Sure, they're everywhere. But that really wasn't the issue. The issue was that what had fallen apart was some core systems that were there. And it taught me to go back and rely on, you have good critical thinking skills, Shirley. You know what it was like to lose your livelihood because you were the other in spite of good performance. And then that led me to form Inclusion Inc., which I've always said inclusion is a business strategy, which might seem odd and still was a little earth-shattering sometimes, even in the recent years when we'd say that, because they think we're missing the human impact. We're not. If it's not about business, it goes away. And it gets maligned into all sorts of other things that aren't really what it is. So that has been my driving force. If you create a culture of inclusion, it's going to drive, and we validated in a global study, it's going to drive engagement and innovation, productivity. It's going to keep your best talent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So where was this? What sort of time frame are we talking now?
The global study,
Mm-hmm.
the global study, I'm in my 25th year of Inclusion Inc. In the 2000s, we did this, a lot of over 300,000 people across industry, across position to say, hey, when do you feel most included? What's the impact of that? When do you feel most excluded? What are the things that we should do to help you feel included? And we had this fantastic US-centric data. And us, we had the wisdom, though, to say, we're going to partner with, of course, as consultants, we don't know anything, Guy. We have to partner with an academic institution, which we did. Southern Methodist University's executive education, Dr. Miguel Canones, who was really renowned guy, and we went to 14 countries. We did that in 2011, and we've kept validating it ever since to see if it's still true. And in the 14 countries, we found 5 top inclusion behaviors. I'm going to share 2 of them with you and your audience. And then I'm going to share the impact of those. And interestingly enough, they were identical to the US.
Wow.
As humans, we want to be asked what we think.
It's not surprising.
Rocket science, right? We want to be asked what we think, especially when that impacts our work and what it is we have to do. Even in a hierarchical country like China, even though it wasn't culturally normative, across all levels of the organization, they would have liked to have been asked. The second thing that I think is as prominent from an inclusion behavior perspective is provide rationale to me. Give me a reason for why we're doing what we're doing. I get that I'm not running the company. Help me understand it. So when we identified all of those behaviors, which I don't want to get into the weeds on, here's what we found. People said they were 20% more likely to come up with innovative ideas and 20% more likely to share them. We know why those 2 are separated. We've both had people roll their eyes at us in meetings and think, oh man, there goes Shirley again, just ignore her, maybe she'll stop talking. Engagement doubled when people were doing that. productivity improved 10%. And I love the fact that people were 4 times more likely to stay. That's without spending a penny.
Wow.
You're just how you're interacting. And I think this is a huge call out when people are thinking about how inclusion is a driver for business. Inclusion behaviors and also skills, which we came to next, are a way for us how we work within the organization so we can harness all the great ideas to do better business. It's not being nice to people. We followed that up with, again, in like the early teens, and we keep tweaking this with an inclusive leader skills assessment, again, globally validated, 360 against that so that you could see, well, yeah, I'm really inclusive to people that are like me, but I don't really care about the opinions of people who are different than me. And we keep working with that. And it's amazing to me whether for some reason we kind of got a niche in the last decade in construction. Again, don't ask me how. But we also got a niche. So we have these two very weirdly opposite ends where the other is like global pharma, global chemical, these super brilliant engineers and scientists. And on this end, people who work their way up maybe from working out on a project. And what I find so interesting is they're so relieved to have skills, to know what to do, and to better understand what inclusion is, because everybody knows what it's like to feel excluded. And then we position the reason for having diverse representation in your workforce is so you can capitalize on selling more goods and services, and so you can have as much talent as you need to drive your business growth. You would think that we're telling them, you can breathe again now. And it was the same, whether this really bright scientist or this guy in the National Electrical Company going, oh, I finally get it. I get it. And it has to do with business.
Yeah. If there's a profit motive there, then
you and I might want to think that that's not why. And sometimes people think I'm being too business centric, but I go 2007, 2008, it got booted out.
Yeah.
It keeps getting booted out because it's not properly positioned as a driver. Did you know, beyond the research we did, there's this really super cool thing that McKinsey did with LinkedIn. And they started in 2014 and all the way now to 2023 was their last report. It says, if you have in your senior ranks, now that's not just the C-suite, and I know that this is US centric, but they did add outside the US, which I'll tell you about in a minute. It says, if you have diverse representation at that level, you will outperform your quadrant, your industry quadrant by 39%. If you have women, you'll outperform it by 39%. If you have people of color, you'll outperform it by 39%. They added 8 additional markets in 2023, and they all still perform at that level.
Wow.
Why wouldn't you want that?
Yeah.
That's what I just don't get. How could there possibly be pushback against that?
Yeah. Wow, amazing. So you look back on this, what are you most proudest of?
In the business that we make sense for people who may never get it otherwise. Now, I will tell you this, I'm making a comment about white men, and I'm married to a white man. You appear to be a white man. I have 2 sons that are white men. I want them to be successful. When we can say to somebody, this isn't because we're trying to be nice to a woman or person of color or a person who's different by any of those other dimensions. We're simply saying you can't get what you need to because there is not enough of that singular population there. And when we get, I mean, sometimes in these sessions that we've done, particularly in COVID, because you can see people's faces real close,
Yeah.
I get tears in my eyes when I see this grumpy old electrician, saying, this is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It sure went fast. Okay, that's like a high compliment. Or a Midwestern chief financial officer in a C-suite saying, I finally get it. I finally understand that there's an experience different than what I'm experiencing. I'm most proud of that, and I'm most proud of my super straight talk about this. So there's a lot of stuff that in this field, people get in their own way. Don't get into, somebody called us once, they wanted us to train on all the 46 different kinds of bias. Why? It's such an in-group thing. And who you need is the C-suite and the top tiers, who in America, the top Fortune 500 CEOs are still 87% white men. That's who I want to get to. I want them to say, this isn't rocket science. It's worth the effort. And so let's come together and try to do it.
Wow. And we were talking just before we started that it's surprising that people don't get that instinctively. But it's interesting listening to you talk because, as you can see, one could say that I was a white male, but I'm an immigrant, child of a single parent, dyslexic, and I don't see myself as any different. I have a background that is different from others, but I see everyone has a different background. And why would you not want to connect? Why would you not want to draw upon all of those experiences? But, in hindsight, maybe it's because I have that slightly different background that makes me more amenable to the different experiences of others. So,
Yeah,
that align.
yes. And I remember sitting in one of these global chemical senior leader meetings, and we were talking about the benefit that's given before you even speak, right? If you're one of the white men in the group, when you speak, they'll begin to know your difference. Compared with my biracial niece, who identifies as a Black woman, she's a brilliant engineer, 23. I won't tell you where because I don't want to call her out in any way, but she's leading a group of high school educated blue collar workers to build this 10-mile bridge. And she said to me, no matter how well educated I am, no matter how I speak, how I dress, people are still going to see me as a Black woman first. And I'm going to have to lay out something for them so that they understand I know what I'm doing in a way that someone else may not.
That's, yeah, been there. I understand that.
Right.
Wow. So you were talking earlier on about being inspired to write. I mean, is 6 books now you've had?
There's 4 things for crediting me with 2 more. The first 3, here's the way I think about the books. Wrote the first one in 2010, and it's called Inclusion, the New Competitive Business Advantage. There was nothing new about it. right? But it was after the recession. And here's what I say about my books. This one's a little leaner. I'll tell you about this one. If you look at titles, charts, and graphs, it will take you 18 minutes to get through. If you look at, the first paragraph, the last paragraph, it might take you 45. I wanted it for leaders to say, this makes sense. And to get away from, some people look at this from the woundedness of who they are. That just doesn't work in corporate senior leadership. I understand the positioning. The second one was to reflect our global work on inclusive leadership, becoming an inclusive leader, how to navigate the 21st century global workforce. And we took those skills, the skills I told you about, and then we created, you see behind me, these different quadrants and dimensions that say, are you self-aware? Are you responsive? And so on. That was to once again, super simply lay that out. In 2020, we revised the 2011 inclusion, still the competitive business advantage. And I think of it like, these aren't New York Times bestsellers. They are validators for someone like you or me to say, I want you to just, look at the title and look at the table of contents and look at the charts, and this will help you. The book that I wrote this year was very unintended. I did not go into this year, but something happened in the US in the last couple of years, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. There was a lot of pushback coming out and disinformation, and you probably heard it reverberate around the world like, oh, Shirley's woke, and people became anti-woke. You're probably woke too, Guy. And so there was a lot of, and I go, what's happening here? And our work after, the murder of George Floyd was so profound and deep, and people were getting something out of this. And then I realized, like in 2022 in the state of Florida, I was down there doing an executive leader session and then 2 sets of direct reports. And when I came in, if you've never been to Orlando or Disney World, you get off and everything's Disney, every shop. And this was at the time when the Florida governor was pushing back on Disney, saying they were woke.
Yes.
Right? And so I made this comment for like 63 seconds. How is it that a governor would take on its largest employer, its biggest tax contributor to the economy on the issue of woke? Because all woke means is multicultural, multi-generational workforce, and it's changing. The CHRO chased me out of the building, scolding me in the second worst scolding I've had in my 20 plus years about being political.
Wow.
How I knew it really, here's senior leaders going, whoa, like, I can't believe she said that. We had a 3.5-hour session. They learned immense things. And then fast forward to the beginning of 2024, I had picked up on all of these state universities shutting down their inclusion, diversity, and equity departments. I had this huge revelation. I remember the date exactly, with Nick Confessori in a New York Times article where it exposed 5 years of work to come up with the appropriate language and the appropriate approach out of the Claremont Institute, which is a conservative think tank, about stopping this anti-American DEI. And what they did was, and my hair was lit on fire. I mean, I could barely sleep. Every day I would go, oh my gosh, oh yeah, oh, it's worse than I thought. And what I realized they did is they said, we're going to come up with a strategy and take the civil rights laws that were for marginalized groups here and say that it's white people who are being discriminated against. And we'll take them to the different state legislators and say, here's your complete package of how to ban inclusion, diversity, and equity and dismantle it at any state-funded universities. That is now the case in 26 of our states that's happened. And so I said, oh, I need to write a white paper. Well, the punchline of that was, no, you need to write a book. So I was for 6 weeks obsessed, possessed, whatever you want, to get this out. And it was very, very difficult for me to write because there's no politics in it. There is a group of people, though, here that want to take us back to the 50s, the good old days, with only mostly white Christian people. And I keep wondering, I love this America. I love the richness of this. I love the fact that 1/3 of the market spend in the US is from multi-ethnic, multiracial people. I think that's so exciting. And so I wrote this book called Deliberate Disruption, Unraveling the Anti-DEI Ideology and Getting Back to Why It Works. I don't feel like I made a dent, but I kept saying, and the thing that I feel that, I don't know if it's true there, I'm curious, corporations have been taught to make any comments that appear political. And so the disinformation was couched as if it was political. And so even Disney didn't speak up until the law went into effect. And it was the anti-woke bill.
Right.
And then they spoke up because their employees were screaming. But it's like people have been trained. I don't know if that's the case there, as opposed to saying, excuse me, America is not only supposed to be a Christian nation according to the Constitution. That's not correct.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not qualified, but as an outsider, even though I've lived here 35 years, I think the history, the heritage of the UK is certainly far more multicultural than in many other countries. The very foundations of England are a mix of different races from across Northern Europe and indigenous to the UK. So, but I still see, that sort of anti-woke aspect. Even now, you get reports and little stories, but it's a constant drip of, organizations that are going too far, or they are focusing on the non-profit things, what's the purpose, and doing things simply for perception rather than because of any underlying driver. So I don't think
and in the last, I, like you, have been on this podcast journey now a short period of time. The last podcast that I did, I really felt like she said, oh, it's so interesting. You're thinking about diversity as a way to sell more goods and services. It's the only real selling point that we have, along with the McKinsey data that says you're going to be more innovative and outperform your peers by 39%. And so if I think about the US and I say, okay, you really want to go back to the 50s? Our economy would be going backwards.
Yeah.
Would we be at, shrinking at the rate of Russia? Would we be slower than that at the rate of Japan? So somehow those of us that are doing the work, myself included, have to keep saying the same thing over and over about this.
Yeah.
That's not factual information. Here's the actual factual information.
And if you think about it, it is just a simple extension of what marketing has been doing with segmentation for 150 plus years. Some of the research in the US goes back.
Yes. When I was at Frito-Lay, I'd say, don't ask me how to sell chips to Latinos. I'm a white woman, as we say here, from Minnesota. don't ask me how to do that. Get people within your ranks and in your leadership who can help inform that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So, well, in terms of sort of stepping out slightly from your career, what advice do you have advice to give to people who are, starting in their career, women like yourself who may still be facing those sorts of prejudices, biases that you had back in your early career days?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I shared with you before we started that Malcolm Gladwell has rewritten his Tipping Point book called The Revenge of the Tipping Point. One
Mhm.
of his and I hope I got that title right there, um, and I've been listening to it on Audible, and I've re-listened to this part about 5 times. He talks about the magic third. And the reason I'm saying this as a woman or as someone who's different, you asked specifically about women, make sure there's enough critical mass of people like you so that your voice can in fact be heard. He uses this in a scenario with board members and 9 board members, and there's only one woman. She has difficulty being heard, goes to 3. And now that changes the whole dynamic. That is the same whether you're thinking about that at university makeups. So just make sure that you have it's beyond allyship. It's just that somebody else will say something like, wait a minute, I just heard Shirley say something and I don't think we listened to it. And so that whole thing, and also before you go anywhere, if you're in early career stage, ask how the culture helps invite differences in. How does the leadership help invite differences in? Not for the difference, because it will help drive the innovation. It will allow voices to help solve the problems. I think about COVID. The most important thing was being critical thinkers and outside the box in COVID and getting as many opinions as possible to solve an impossible situation.
Yeah.
Just don't go anywhere you're going to be the only. It's not worth the effort. Would see from this stage in my career, no, go where there are people that at least you can have someone who can help you be heard and advocated for.
Thank you. And it's an interesting point. It sort of raises the question about, who do you have around you, family, friends, to help guide you through these tough times as well?
I think that I have a really tight family unit, husband. I have 2 sons. The older one is, I think he's 35, and I always say, you're way smarter than me in business. So I'm going to come to you with
Mm.
business ideas as a young white man who's a president of a global company spread out all over. I would say it's fair to say some of these people at this stage in the year are a little sick of me because I'm going, first 2 months of the year, every year, you believe this really happened. I didn't make this up. I'm trying to simmer that down a little bit, but I do have a good tight group. It's tough depending on what kind of environment you're in to share that within your organization. You have to feel that out for yourself, whether that's really a safe place or not. And I think you need to be in a safe place. When I described learning everything I learned about the disinformation, that I needed a shower for toxic energy every day,
Wow.
because the level of money being put behind these anti-woke things and the fabrications were so extreme. I had difficulty believing that they were happening. And I keep saying, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I did not make this up. Here is the source for that, and here's the person who said it. I'm just saying it out loud right now, and it sounds a little crazy.
Wow. And just for listeners, we're recording this not long after a new president-elect has been selected. So it's a time of great change in the USA. So hence the response to some extent, I suggest.
Yeah, and I'll have to say it's I'll keep my comments to my work. I feel like he has said publicly he wants to eliminate inclusion, diversity, and equity across the board. He has said that he will have the Department of Justice go after universities where white people were discriminated against and that they will get reparations. There's nothing to say that is happening. And we could do another whole episode on women's healthcare and women's rights and the horror of that. But as it relates to my work, it's so heavy and so depressing that I just have to pull away from it just about every day and try to go be productive in a way that I am with you here, and trying to continue to share why people should care about inclusion as a business strategy for what they're doing, and why they should openly embrace all the differences that brings.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was delightful to be with you across the pond, so to speak.
Thank you, Shirley. Any last words before we break?
Now, just if people would like to find me, I'm at www.inclusion-inc.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn. And I have found finally people are starting to talk some truthful talk about my work, and it's not, oh, everything's going fine. No, everything is not going fine. And let's have a conversation about how we can collectively get out the power of this.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you.